This episode is made possible by Audible.
You feel, however, that we're making progress in this country and worldwide?
No. I will never say that progress is being made. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress. If you pull it all the way out, that's not progress. The progress is healing the wound that's a blow made. And they haven't even begun to pull a knife out, much less try and heal the wound. They won't even admit the knife is there.
You know how Thanksgiving sucks and always ends up becoming about what's happening with politics that week? This episode is kind of about that. Hello, internet types. On this episode of Old Man Yells at Cloud, we're complaining about the politics of lesser evil, or harm reduction discourse. I'm gonna make a big deal about this because, well, I'm that old man. I'm upset, and it sucks. Because I'd like to live in a true democracy, and I don't. And if you live in the same kind of non-democracy as I do, here in sunny USA, you might not be happy about it either. So let's talk about that. And as we get started, allow me to read out the long, tedious disclaimer paragraph I've spent more time on than the rest of this video. I am not an accelerationist. I do not wish to see people's material conditions worsen in the short term on the hope that they will get so bad that things will swing the other way in some imprecise future. That doesn't work. I am also not policing what you choose to do. Vote blue or don't vote blue. If you live anywhere here, it probably doesn't even matter. And no matter where you live, it'll usually only matter a tiny bit. Just enough to make it worth getting it over with and voting. But probably not much more. Not for nothing, voting sucks because the blue team sucks. I know that. I know, as you can see from this video about the ratchet effect I made a couple months ago, that voting for the lesser evil doesn't do anything for progress, and that our politics move further right over time thanks to the increasing power of corporate interest since the takeover of neoliberalism in the 80s. That sucks too. I also know that letting presidents go from far-right, fascist, proto-fascist, whatever, to the same guy but worse 4 years later, and at whatever pace they dictate is bad too. Worse even. I am well aware of all that. I'm not gonna try to deny any of these claims in this video. Stopping some form of far-right politics with regular right-wing politics doesn't make anybody happy except those on the right. But just because I know that fact doesn't mean I won't do it when I think there's an option. But I hate that I have to say this, and I hate that even though I despise this guy and his buddies, I just spent like 45 seconds sort of defending him and probably making you upset in the process. I want to do not that. The good thing is that that's not what this video is going to be about. But it's just close enough to being about that I want to get ahead of people who comment before watching all the way through. This week, we're looking at the discourse of lesser evils. Because even if, at the very least, part of the lesser evil political strategy does stave off some of the most evil politics the previous 4 years have cooked up, another part of that discourse is weaponized to narrow down politics to what you do at the ballot box and nothing else. And that's a big problem worth making a video about. Because if you're just a normal person who considers themselves a liberal, and you've used this sort of rhetoric before, I truly, genuinely believe you have good intentions. This video is hopefully just going to point out the ways in which those intentions don't always match up with the consequences. Either because politicians will take advantage of your good intentions for stuff you disagree with, or because you'll spend so much effort on the elections that everything else kind of disappears between electoral cycles. Okay, disclaimer over. Back to having fun. Fart noise. Great. Now we're having fun again. Take my internet hand. Don't worry about how it feels. I have a condition. And let's talk about this. First, we should go over how much the lesser evil stuff works out to be in the end by giving a little account of the Biden presidency so far. Consider this when you spend so much effort on the presidential election. Because despite Biden running on, quote, the most progressive Democratic agenda America has ever seen, his policies amount to little more than taking one step forward after the Trump presidency took 2 steps back. On the plus side, Biden has canceled plans for the Keystone Pipeline, has reversed Trump-era policies on methane emissions, has overturned the Muslim ban, freed up resources to deal with the 2017 hurricane that hit Puerto Rico, passed a child tax credit to reduce child poverty, extended the pause on student loan repayment, and resumed a pause on federal executions. Those are the handful of things that Biden has done that most on the left consider fine-ish. Not progress, just I can't believe it got to this point in the first place kind of policies. Pulling the knife back out a couple inches, but leaving it in there to be sure. Because you can't just take out the knife, where else would the knife go? Away? Wait, the knife could go away? Sorry, I'm getting distracted. The rest of Biden's good-ish policies, well, frankly, there isn't much of a rest to talk about. It's mostly bad stuff. But I know what you're thinking. Surely it can't be so much bad stuff that I can't say it all in a single breath. Well, why don't we find out? Since becoming president, Biden has continued the trend of border detainment and reinforcement between the US and Mexico that has been snowballing from cabinet to cabinet for at least 4 presidents, has deported more people under Title 42 than Trump while defending his administration's use of that right in the courts, has continued using drone strikes, which, though fewer in number, have still killed civilians, despite the US not being formally at war with any country, and, also it being a war crime and all. He's called for increasing police budgets and police departments' access to military equipment, has continued escalating tensions between the US and China, Russia, Venezuela, and Cuba, sanctioned Afghanistan, starving their people in the process, has endorsed the Israeli apartheid government and its inhumane and relentless aggression against and occupation of Palestine, has continued supplying the Saudis with arms used in Yemen, one of, if not the greatest humanitarian crisis in our lifetime. He's increased the military budget, tried abusing executive powers and seizing reporters' records before backing down once his plan was exposed. He's pursued the prosecution of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, increased the power of the surveillance state in a set of domestic anti-terrorism policies, staffed his cabinet with executives from Wall Street and the pharmaceutical, weapons, and fossil fuel industries, channeled COVID test availability through insurance reimbursement as opposed to free testing, vastly reducing the actual amount of testing that could have given us a more accurate idea of the state of the pandemic, inconveniencing everyone in the process, ignoring the uninsured and the poor completely, and empowering insurance companies to turn a profit. He has taken a passive role in intellectual property waivers for vaccines after declaring that to be one of his administration's key goals, specifically so he could protect the economic interests of American manufacturers, and therefore slowing down the resolution of the pandemic and allowing human casualties and serious infections to continue at their present rate, and also increasing the chance of new variants. He's quietly stripped away protections from endangered species, approved a record number of oil drilling permits, upheld the construction of the Line 3 pipeline, and of course is constantly pressing for compromise with Republicans to thin out ambitious proposals and whining on the sidelines when Manchin or Sinema block a vote instead of using his role as president of the country to apply maximum pressure on their vote. Whew, one breath. See, I told you it wasn't that bad. I definitely didn't edit out all the dozens of breaths I had to take to get through that massive list. And that's just what's happened while he's been president. The pre-campaign dissections on Biden's decades-long bad record with civil rights, imprisonment, social welfare, sexual assault, war, segregation, and everything else aren't even mentioned here. What a good guy. The point is that when we say the lesser of two evils, we are still contending with this much evil, and it's important to know that. As always, sources for this video are in the description. Feel free to fact-check any of these claims. Now, faced with this kind of depressing account, you might want to find comfort in local elections, where it feels like your vote actually counts for something and your values of equality, justice, and the basic safety and decent life of all people are guaranteed. But there too, in states and cities where Democrats act as a one-party state, their political decisions continue to hurt everyday people in the same way they do at the national level. Like a newly renovated wall in an elevator shaft, you're getting screwed at every level. From an advanced militarized police state in New York City, to a regressive local and state tax rate in deep blue Washington, where the poorest 20% pay over 5 times more in taxes relative to the top 1%, the Democratic record doesn't improve simply by lowering the scale to local politics. It's also, of course, in blue states where affordable housing is hardest to find. Education is most sharply divided between the rich and the poor, and inequality is rising fastest, to name just a few issues. After hearing all this, you might hear a voice in your head telling you that this is still the party of lesser evil. And most of the time, you're probably right. All of this could have just as easily happened under the previous guy. Not to mention the staffing of courts by far-right judges, the relatively greater number of bombs dropped, the total and unabashed environmental deregulation, the bolstering of fascist networks and far-right militias, and that list goes on too. But it still remains the case that defending a party that so easily casts you and the people you care for aside does not win you anything. If they cannot care about you this much, why care so much about them? Much more beneficial to the realization of your values and the way you want to see the world work is to spend maybe 2% of your time on pushing these institutions to the extent they will allow it, voting for whoever does the least harm in the short term, and the rest of the energy you set aside for politics, the 98% remaining, into bettering the world directly. Spend 15 minutes every 4 years slipping the paper into the box or pushing a touchscreen, and then spend the massive amount of time in between doing stuff that matters. Half of this country doesn't vote, and you've never seen that convince a Democrat to move left. So work outside elections. If it's mutual aid, it's mutual aid. If it's learning more about how to organize, what different political theories offer, general education about the plight and suffering caused under our current economic and political model, then do that. If it's informing others and winning them to your side, spend your energy there. It is infinitely more valuable to create systems that resolve the problems you see directly when possible, to directly improve people's lives and fight to change the system that constantly underpromises and still manages to underdeliver, than it is to fight tirelessly within the framework of a system built on preserving the decaying status quo. Everyday people's influence on a government of plutocrats is nearly zero. Working to change that government, or making it increasingly irrelevant through networks of solidarity, that is where your influence and your mark on the world will be the most felt. I understand that this isn't for everybody, that spending time on politics is exhausting and difficult and never feels like it amounts to much. The thing is that you're probably already doing it. There's a chance you will have spent a tremendous amount of energy fighting tooth and nail for the lesser evil, and come out on the other side with only meager rewards for your efforts. Insignificant compared to what you put in. Practically nothing. Spend that energy better. People who spend day and night talking about the lesser evil and harm reduction, either in the run-up to a big election or whenever someone starts critiquing the other kind of boys in blue, know this. It's a purposeful distraction and reduction from what politics really is. Organizing human society, not the spectacle of two guys duking it out. Nurture within yourself the voice that is already there, telling you that the Democrats aren't doing enough for you, and resist them at every turn. If you live in a safely blue state and don't have to worry about the even worse party getting through, vote third party unashamedly. The spoiler effect of first-past-the-post voting is a built-in feature of our electoral system, and threatening a party that does not give us enough where it feels safest is incredibly minor, but necessary to scaring them of our collective power. If you work in an industry that is already unionized or has the potential to be, use your collective power there too to get the gains you are owed and resist the people desperate to wrestle them away from you. By all means, pull the lever on the trolley, but then get off and start ripping apart the train tracks. I know that this is an idealistic narrative that's easy to cast aside, but really meditate on how much of your everyday life is poured into obsessing over what happens in a room full of old, wealthy people made almost completely unaccountable to you and me, and think about where that energy could go instead. Elections are not without their importance, but under a political and economic model where they will always stop short of actually representing our collective interests, they will never be what politics is really about. For one thing, it's because these systems weren't built with democracy in mind. The birth of the Republic happened at a very particular moment in history, when revolutionaries wanted to throw out the kings. Once they figured that out, they had a list of ideas about what they wanted to do with society, and they built their political and economic system accordingly, creating institutions that would deliver the changes they saw fit, not pristine displays of human democracy. The Founding Fathers were terrified of democracy, the idea that those dirty pores should have a say, and they built a political order explicitly on the idea of giving a few wealthy, landowning whites the power to decide the politics and economy of a nation. Whatever mechanism let them do that is the one they kept and enshrined in a constitution. It's no accident that we have first-past-the-post voting and politics based on territorial representation over political pluralism. It's what keeps the same people in power election after election and keeps any challenger party out. It's no accident that the country is led by a single guy with almost infinite political power. The Founding Fathers kinda liked the idea of a monarchy. One guy with all the power. Mono meaning one, archy meaning power. Just not from an unelected, snaggle-toothed Brit. It is no accident that the only real way to gain political power in this country is by cozying up to corporations and the wealthy, to be in the good books of the media institutions that reach into every American household. It's what keeps revolutionaries out. The point is, even if we all have the right to vote today, well, you know, except if you're under 18, a felon, not a citizen, forced to work that day, don't have the kind of ID that is now the right kind all of a sudden, you've been purged off a voter roll, have a disability that makes it impossible or nearly so to get to the polls, or generally speaking are part of some racial group your politician doesn't like. Just forget all that for a second. Even if we, quote, all have the right to vote today, we are still doing so within the bounds of institutions that are built around preserving a very specific status quo and the power of a wealthy few. People complain that Congress doesn't do anything because, well, yeah, that's the point. Under a political system like this one, and an economic model that allows a few people to exploit it to its limit, your values of egalitarianism, of justice, of guaranteeing people a decent life are just not going to be realized. And certainly never to the extent that you think is morally correct. You're a good person. You want the best for yourself, for your family, for your friends, and for the rest of the regular, decent people in this country and around the world. The kinds of things we all want for our fellow human beings aren't going to happen as long as someone can go digging for power in deeper pockets. And as long as the capitalist neoliberal status quo remains in place, there will always be deeper pockets than yours and mine. I realized that for some of my audience, this video may have come across as fairly accusatory. I definitely don't intend to attack anyone's beliefs, but it is important that we all get on the same page about just how ineffective liberalism really is. Changing your perspective isn't something any of us can do overnight. It takes dedication, hard work, and deconstructing some of the erroneous beliefs we hold. To make that easier for people, I try my best to learn and understand as much as I can so that I can share it with others. And one way I like to do that is by listening to audiobooks. I travel a lot for work, so I have plenty of time to sit on planes and listen to fascinating audiobooks on Audible. One great one that I recently listened to, and that was a big factor in the decision to make this video, is the Autobiography of Malcolm X. You probably remember that I started this episode with a clip of Malcolm X talking about harm reduction. That quote really resonated with me the first time I heard it, and hopefully it did with you too. Malcolm X was a fascinating figure, and I know I'm not alone in saying that his autobiography is one of the most eye-opening titles I've listened to yet. If you're somehow not familiar with Audible, they've got thousands of titles in every category imaginable, whether you're into politics or history or science fiction. They've also got an impressive selection of podcasts and Audible originals, and their catalog is constantly expanding. And if you like to learn as much as I do, getting a free audiobook every month is pretty nice. I don't think I can accurately convey how much I love Audible. I struggle to sit down and read a book, but with Audible, I can get through all the titles I've wanted to, all while running errands or commuting or traveling for work. It's completely changed how I learn. If you enjoyed this week's video, I highly recommend you check out the Autobiography of Malcolm X on Audible. It is a fantastic listen. So, if you want to help support my channel so I can produce more content like this, visit audible.com/secondthought or text second thought, one word, to 500-500. Sign up today and get your first month absolutely free. It really does help support me and my channel. Get started by following the link below or by texting second thought to 500-500. If you enjoyed this video, consider dropping a like. If you hated it, a thumbs down. You can check out my previous episodes by clicking the links on your screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.